Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the All Things Policy podcast. I am your host for today, Arindam Goswami. I work at the Takshashila Institution in the High-Tech Geopolitics program as a research analyst. Today, we are tackling a policy that was touted as a game changer in India's industrial landscape, the Production Linked Incentive PLI scheme. Launched to position India as a global manufacturing hub, these schemes promised a lot. For example, to boost domestic production, attract investments, reduce import dependencies, and a lot more. But is the PLI strategy really delivering on its promises? Are there hidden costs or unintended consequences that we need to consider? Join us as we unravel this and a lot more as we look at the complexities of PLI schemes and explore how these incentives are reshaping industries in India and in general India's economic trajectory. And to discuss all this with me, I have today Miheer Karandikar, my colleague and fellow researcher from Takshashila Institution. He has done a lot of research on this particular topic, on industrial policy in general, and on economic policy in general. Hi, Miheer.
Hi,
Welcome
Arindam.
and great to have
Excited
you
to be
here.
here. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. But before we, jump into PLI schemes, before we start discussing PLI schemes, could you briefly discuss what are industrial policies in general and what role do they play in incentivizing economic development or industrial development?
Yeah. So industrial policies are targeted interventions aimed at transforming the structure of a specific sector or the economy in general. So many people have defined in industrial policies in very different ways. They have given different type of typologies for industrial policy. So some also classify, broad-based economic interventions like R&D tax credits, innovation policy, which kind of don't focus on one sector but on the whole economy, also as industrial policy. So there's a lot of different definitions, but it's basically that you want to promote a sector, you want to promote the export of a sector, sales of a sector, or you want to promote a sector because there's some kind of market failure in it. Say, for example, agglomeration, you need more agglomeration in that, or credit constraints can be problems, or even industrial policies can be used for sectors which are important for national security, right? So, for example, if a lot of your defense imports or defense equipment is coming from countries that might potentially be enemies or adversaries, then you can use industrial policy to kind of wrench that their manufacturing back from them to promote manufacturing to your country. But they are not just related to manufacturing either. They can be used in services sectors also. So it's kind of a broad framework, but I've tried to synthesize all these frameworks into one kind of definition, right? I mean, I might be wrong here, but so industrial policy comprises intentional state interventions aimed at selectively targeting specific sectors or activities to achieve strategic national objectives, both economic and non-economic, aimed to be guided by a long-term vision and typically addressing specific market failures through both price-based and non-price mechanisms. So there's not just a lot of sectors that you can use in manufacturing services, even in manufacturing in services, but there's a lot of different interventions that you can also use in industrial policy. So some of these interventions can be, just our tax credits, subsidies. They can be, import substitution, export promotion. They can be marketing support. They can be, business development support provided by the government. They can be SEZ like interventions in which, you give them land to. They can be infrastructure provision. So a lot of these things. So, but this is a kind of introduction to what industrial policies are. Recently, they're making kind of a comeback. The US CHIPS Act was a very famous example. The US also IRA Act. The Europe has a bunch of acts for semiconductor development, for car manufacturing, and a lot of the 20th century, early 21st century economic growth that we saw from these East Asian tigers, so to say. There are studies that link that to industrial policy. So Taiwan, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, some of them are a little controversial, but we might say that, industrial policy played some kind of a hand in their growth story.
So, since you've given some examples of South Korea, and so if you could maybe just touch upon those industrial policies a little bit.
Yeah, just to give like a brief on them. So South Korea was very famous for industrial policy in their heavy chemical industry sector. So it's called HCI sector. So they used it mainly for manufacturing downstream equipments needed for defense manufacturing or car manufacturing, electronics manufacturing. That in so this kind of the downstream industry that they built up first using heavy industrial policy. So they consolidated a lot of these companies in under state control, give them a lot of money basically, and then promoted their export. So some other in private, some other was state controlled, but their main focus was on promoting export growth in their in these sectors. So as to grow the economy, to generate employment, to generate foreign forex, etc., etc. So this kind of South Korea. Then I think in Japan, again there was a lot of focus on big manufacturing industries like cars, like steel, electronics afterwards. And there's this one government promotion agency called MITI that did a lot of this work. So some people say that's not industrial policy, some people say that. So it's kind of controversial, but something like that. Taiwan had industrial policy for especially for the semiconductors manufacturing. So they moved from assembly, testing, packaging to sort of the higher fabs and foundries that they control a lot of this now. So it's kind of economic policy scattered around various countries.
And from what you just said, it doesn't seem that industrial policy focuses on just one leg of a supply chain. It could be across a supply
Right,
chain,
yeah.
like up the higher value chain as well as down the value chain. Right. So yeah. So that was great. That was a wonderful introduction to industrial policy. Now let's let's dive into PLI schemes, right? So if you could explain what are PLI schemes and how has India generally approached them, maybe a little bit going into the past and then in the recent past also.
So production linked incentives or PLIs, their short form, are schemes in which companies in select 14 sectors get subsidies based on their sale volume of goods manufactured in India. So some of them have additional sales, some of them have sales, but it's basically based on how much you sell, how much you manufacture in the country and then sell. It doesn't matter if you sell domestically or outside. So this is like the most basic breakdown of the schemes. So there are 14 kind of 13 14 main sectors. So automobile and auto components, aviation, which is drones, chemicals, which is ACC batteries, electronics manufacturing, so that has one tranche in which they give so mobile phones and also other kind of laptops and PC screens and CPUs and that kind of products. So then there's food processing, there's medical devices, different kinds of medical devices that you need in hospitals, metals and mining, which is basically specialty steel, pharma, renewable energy, which is solar PV cells, telecom goods, white goods. So white goods are like LEDs and tube lights and this kind of stuff, basic consumer electronic stuff, and textiles and apparel. So under textile and apparel, there's called man-made fiber. So that's what they are kind of. So these are the main 14 sectors. They started in 2019. Some sectors started in 2019, then others came in. Then in the meanwhile, there have been second, third iterations of some others. Based on how many applied, how much money was given. But a lot of money was proposed for this. So it's like approximately 1 lakh crore. Of that was their overhaul.
Right.
Yeah. So this is an introduction to PLI sectors, and the basic logic behind PLIs is that you incentivize companies to get over that first kind of initial barrier to set up shop in India. That can be high labor cost, that can be high capital cost, land cost, whatever, or just regulatory problems, etc. But you help them get over that barrier by giving them promising them subsidies of subsidize their manufacturing basically. And then once they have set their shop in the country, then you can even you can wean them off probably after at a certain in like 5 years, 10 years, whatever, and then that will that will induce job creation, that will induce investment in the country, that will increase manufacturing, etc. So that's a general kind of
Right. So those are the stated aims of PLI schemes in general, right? Like
yeah.
making Indian companies globally competitive, reduce import dependency, and create global manufacturing champions.
Yeah.
Right. So in the op-ed that you have written on this topic, you've also mentioned how those 14 or 13, 14 sectors were chosen.
Right.
Either they are strategic sectors or industries, or they're like sunrise industries. So if you
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
maybe expand a little bit on
Yeah.
that.
So, uh, so in the initial notification, they provided two kind of reasons for selecting these sectors. So they were either to be strategic or sunrise. So strategic is, like I said in the introduction, these are important for national security, defense, and so you need the manufacturing to be done by trusted parties, trusted sources. So you basically need them to be done in the country, right? So that is one strategic sector. It's not just defense manufacturing, but also things like chips, can be extremely, important for strategy in India. So that is strategic. Then the other is sunrise, which is upcoming sectors, right, which don't have a lot of, their manufacturing is not that matured in other nations as well. So you want to kind of get that first mover advantage, in which you build, you innovate that, and you are like the best possible, best in the world to kind of supply that. You become the first mover, you get that advantage. So that is, this is two main. So these are well established reasons for why industrial policy is done, but question is, are they the real reasons why they have been chosen? So our analysis finds that two might be, electronics, and might be selected for strategic reasons. There are three probable sunrise sectors. So PV cells, drones, you can say medical devices are, sunrise sectors. But the others, they don't really fall under, any of these categories. So then what are they chosen for? So five of them were mostly chosen for import dependence, and even if that is included as another category, there are four which still don't have any kind of explanation.
Okay.
Right? So say two were strategic, three were probably sunrise, five were import dependence, and there is no clear strategy for the other four. So electronics manufacturing could be considered, it's strategic also, it's kind of a sunrise also, because you want to build that, assembly, testing, packaging, you want that in your country. But sorry, import dependence is not strategic, because most of the electronics that come to India are manufactured in China. So most of these, so all the import dependent sectors are generally import dependence on China, and it seems like that's the reason why they have selected them. So they don't state that explicitly, but it seems like that's because that's the only logical kind of reason, right? And then others, like for example, white goods, right? So there is what is strategic in tube lights and LED goods, and there's nothing sunrise in that either. I mean, they have been produced for a long time. So this is the import dependence. I mean, that's all. Most of the these white goods that come to India are manufactured in China. Some say in Vietnam or other countries, but I mean, it's basically import dependence. And then sectors like food processing. I mean, this there's neither sunrise. I mean, this food processing been happening for such a long time. Import dependence, I mean, you can't import food processing, and there's no strategic really reason for food processing either. So there's not clear why why food processing has been chosen, but probably just they wanted, so these reasoning can be applied afterwards, and they just wanted this industry to be chosen for some reason, and then it said sunrise and strategic. So that's the main. So that's.
So it seems like post the trade wars that have started between US and China, and the attempts at de-risking and decoupling and all of that, it's probably, as you said, it's the reasons have been force fit for onto some actions that the government has taken, but the reasoning was something different. Right. So, could we now look at how these PLI schemes have actually fared, right? What have been their achievements and failures? And say, for example, if a particular industry has been chosen for some reason, for some stated reason, have the incentives really matched with what should have been done for that particular sector, right? Say, for example, you also talked about it, like sunrise sector should be supported for R&D and innovation, but do the PLI schemes actually do that, or do they just incentivize production, right? So, yeah, let's talk about the achievements and failures of PLIs.
Yeah, right. So, first of all, there's not a lot of data on this. The government generally doesn't publish only the success stories. So, you might find food processing, a very success story, generate a lot of jobs. But others, you have to really dig deep down. So, there are two main studies. So, one was published in EPW that analyzed, annual survey of industries data to see how these sectors are fared. So, this industries in which the 14, 13 sectors in which these PLSs have been administered, they check that annual data over say 10, 14 years to see what has happened. So they show that the industries which were picked, for example electronics, already had high growth. So they already had high growth over the last 10 years, and then they were picked to and then it's most likely that they will still continue that high growth over after the PLI scheme have been introduced. And so yeah, it's really counterintuitive to pick them, because in industrial policy you can, I mean, it can be much better used if you want to promote these sunrise sectors or new sectors that you want to develop your advantage in. Some people say that acting on your own comparative advantage can also be very helpful, but I don't know if PLI schemes is the right way to do that. Anyway, so compared to overall manufacturing in the country, PLI schemes are high growth industries, especially electronics, medical devices, automobiles, and textiles, which is man-made fibers, right? But so they have analyzed the growth in gross value added. So the intention of the schemes is that as the companies start manufacturing in the country, they will move to higher parts across the value chain and promote increased value added in the country. So that's what the induced reason is. So this varies very much across PLI sectors. For electronics, GVA growth is lower, but it is higher for automobiles, textiles, and pharmaceuticals. Also medical devices and white goods. So so probably electronics, the GVA growth hasn't increased much, but for the others it has been kind of successful. So there can be different kind of variables that explain this, but the one main kind of lesson that they find is capital productivity growth has been the biggest driver for these sectors. So how better you use your machinery, how better you use your financing, that has explained most of the growth in these sectors. So and the sectors that grew most already had higher growth before the PLI. So all the sectors almost had higher growth than manufacturing in general, but even the ones that grew the most had high growth before. So this kind of momentum is continuing under the PLIs, right? So value addition, like I said, is evident for pharma, automobiles, medical devices, and textiles. And for electronics, specialty steel, and ACC batteries, value addition decreased over the reference years. So after when the PLI scheme was introduced, so this is the main kind of lesson. After that, there's an Indian Express report that shows how many jobs were created for the sector. So in India right now, there's a lot of pressure on the government to create a lot of jobs, right? So even Takshashila is working on that. So one of the stated aims of PLI was to create jobs, to induce investment and create jobs for the country, manufacturing jobs. So only pharma and food processing created as much jobs as they were meant to. Food processing was very successful. It created like almost 3 times the job it was meant to. But pharma was just about enough. But So there's only two sectors that created enough jobs. Electronics and telecom created a little more than half the jobs they were supposed to. So I think electronics was supposed to create like 2,500,000 jobs. So 2,50,000 jobs. That's somewhere around 1,25,000, somewhere like that. Telecom was supposed to create very less jobs in general, but so telecom was supposed to create 40,000 jobs. It's generated about 23,000 jobs. So that's still low. But so there's two that created more than they were supposed to, two that created a little more than half that they were supposed to, and none others are close. So some of these sectors are, short, they just started, but even in their first iteration of the PLI scheme, they still didn't create enough jobs as they were used to. So this is a major red flag that out of the 14 sectors, 10 did not create enough, nowhere close to enough jobs that they were supposed to. So if job creation is their aim, then it has not been successful, right? So at an aggregate level, about 13 lakh jobs that they were supposed to create, 5 lakh were created. So pharma created 77,000 and food processing created almost 2 lakh 45,000. So heavily skewed by this, but on job creation front, unsuccessful. I mean, that's the evident.
And you made a good point about the value addition, right? Where I guess you said electronics did not, in terms of value addition, it was not a lot, right? So interestingly, Raghuram Rajam had also raised doubts about the efficacy of the government's PLI schemes, especially related to electronics manufacturing, right? He'd said that the PLI scheme for smartphones, for example, gives out more money in like handouts to companies than the actual domestic value addition that happens in assembling this, and it sort of fails to promote in-house production of electronics and other goods. It rather was encouraging import of hardware from other countries, which was supposedly an aim to reduce the import dependence, right? But so he had shown a lot of data also, where he showed there was a substantial rise in imports of electronic components such as semiconductors, PCBs, and others. And whether he was questioning whether we were genuinely even producing these, finished products, or we were just assembling them, right? I guess so. What he was also saying that it's not just exports. So exports actually increased in electronics, but the net impact on our external account, to ascertain that, we need to also consider what were the imports and royalties and profits and all that foreign manufacturers take out. So that brings us to the other part of this thread, where we look. Let's look at like what could be some unintended consequences of PLI schemes, and what other failures could be there, right? So in general, PLI schemes have different unintended consequences, like you could promote over concentration in select sectors, uneven regional development, and all such, right? So anything that you want to talk about?
So unintended consequences, I think you kind of covered or concentration in select sectors. So because the government is offering a lot of money in select sectors, a lot of companies might stand to that. That might lead to bogus companies just trying to get that money and then not manufacture, not at it at all. Again, like you said, so if in electronic sector the companies are not moving to higher parts of the value chain, then it will just the government will keep supplying money, companies will keep producing by just assembling or produce a very small part of the total manufacturing in India and just getting that money based on whatever sales they are doing. So that's kind of when it becomes a measure, it stops Goodhart's law, right? So and over dependence on incentives government helps. So again, if after the government stops giving PLI schemes, companies still can't manufacture on their own, then it will go in this chain of the government keeps giving money, and once it tries to stop, the companies come out and say that no, we can't be sustainable, just give us more money, we're generating so much jobs, etc. So there needs to be kind of a sunset clause for these policies. If there's not, then there can be just leaking of money over some time. Another problem that India has run into some in recent years is global trade friction. So basically there are some complaints in the WTO related to tariff measures, but under the WTO, some incentives in which you incentivize companies on exports or on local value addition are not allowed. So under WTO treaties, so if the government diverts into that, then there might be. Right now, it's not I think this kind of covers the
Right.
concept.
Yeah, there's also the problem of neglect of MSMEs, right? Micro, small and medium enterprises. Like
Right.
you had also written about it in your op-ed. So if you could expand on that maybe.
Yeah. So MSMEs and multinational companies need different kind of industrial policy interventions to be successful, right? So, for example, the food processing industry, food processing PLI scheme. The main problem in food processing is that most of these companies that process food in India are unorganized, small. Right. They need to come together to have those economies of scale, to gain those agglomeration economies. Transport for them is a big problem. Supply chain is a big problem. The government tried to support that with the refrigerators, warehouses across the country. But you need more of these kind of incentives. But if those are not offered, so if the PLI scheme was just given and this infrastructure is not expanded, especially intervention target for MSMEs are not offered, then it will only go to multinational companies. So, for example, one clause in the food processing PLI scheme says that you need to invest 5 crore rupees across 5 years. So, if a smaller MSME cannot do that, then there's a big problem. They can't get. Right. So, if the government is trying to include those MSMEs, they need to do different kind of incentives targeted around that, right? So, you can have marketing support, formalization support. You can have ease of taxation, ease of business. These are not PLIs, but these are still industrial policy. Right. So, just giving money, these don't include giving money. The government, but they're still industrial policies. The government might support these companies better by actually giving them this kind of support, which they can't probably get through normal channels. So, like you said, that can come. So, unless there's like a pipeline of interventions decided for MSMEs, they will be neglected. They will be taken out of these industries. So, yeah.
Right. In that context, you had mentioned about Thailand's experience in this, right? So, what was that experience, and what can India learn from that?
So, not just Thailand, there's a lot of industrial policies around the world that India can gain lessons from. So, Thailand success was in food processing industry. They kind of moved into a higher value chain where they used a cluster-based approach, where they got a lot of these companies to come together, set up plants in physically, close locations, which gets that solves that kind of transportation problem, solve the supply chain problem. In some ways, you can get a lot of farm produce into one kind of area, which reduces the cost for this infrastructure, cost for transportation, etc. And that can create those innovation hubs in which, when there are 5, 7, whatever, say 10 food processing industries in the country in the same place, then other companies can be incentivized to innovate and to go there, set up shop there to support these industries, right? So it creates agglomeration economics basically. Right. So they use that a lot and integrated small producers into organized supply chains. So this is not just financing or production linked incentives, right? This was a different kind of industrial policy intervention. So if the government wants to promote a food processing industry, if the government wants to promote MSMEs in this industry, then PLI schemes may not be enough. So these kind of interventions need to be used. Another so SME support program that Vietnam used was to give, like I said, soft industrial policy tools. So business development support, matching companies with real estate and business parks. So this kind of, informal support, not informal, but not just financial, not just tax breaks, not just, things like this, but actually thinking what their problems are, what their market failures are, where they don't have the capabilities, and then solving that. So just offering all these sectors the same production linked incentive might not be the best way to go about it. And another, for example, is Singapore. So Singapore, a good experience in bettering their quality of pharma production. So India right now produces a lot of 6% of global trade of pharma goes through India, right? A lot of the manufacturing happens in India. The biggest problem is quality control. So Singapore did that. They built a comprehensive quality management system. They had strong regulatory support, strong measures, policing measures, etc. And they gave them a lot of R&D incentives. So quality control, you can increase your quality when you innovate in better techniques, better facilities, better machinery, and the government needs to incentivize that, not just give them the logic that, you give these companies money, they'll set up shop, they'll set up manufacturing and slowly invest in. That's a long logic. There's a lot, there's too many steps, there's too many, lot of part dependence to get into innovation after a certain point of time. So if R&D and innovation is to be supported, then just directly support that. So
Right.
that's an example.
So basically, it's like just PLIs or just financial incentives won't really work in isolation. You need to look at other aspects, other nuanced sector
Right.
specific
Yeah.
interventions. Like, so for example, SMEs, you mentioned their unorganized nature, technological backwardness, lack of quality standards, and all
Right.
of that. Right. So there have to be targeted interventions in those sectors also. You also mentioned about innovation and R&D, right, and
Yeah.
how that can help in the integration into the global value chain, right, and could you maybe speak a little bit on that? You mentioned about in your op-ed you've written about DARPA and Bell Labs and that one fantastic study from Mashelkar, Shah and Thomas,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
shows how India can do it. So if you can maybe just touch
Yeah,
upon
so
that.
R&D innovation is probably the best way to drive, increase, going higher up the global value chain. I've said this word too many times now, but still, and that will allow Indian companies to actually compete globally and get a market share in the global market, and get success. That will drive it. Nothing drives positive externalities more than R&D in innovation, especially in manufacturing and in a lot of other sectors. So PLI, like I said, PLIs don't especially incentivize them companies to innovate. There can be many other, industrial policy interventions. So one good way is trade policies, right? So uh, aligning your trade policy with regional blocks, like IPEF, or like the US has a lot of these trade blocks, can be very more effective. So you allow these good companies in other countries to sell in India, then you compete with the global best in your country, which incentivizes domestic companies to also innovate, invest in R&D, and to become globally competitive. Another way is targeted infrastructure development. So like said, for food processing, this targeted infrastructure that these companies need. Semiconductors, for example, need really targeted infrastructure that the government needs to support if you want to drive so higher GVC. FDI is also a very good way to do that. You attract more FDI, you that will support. So American companies that are investing in FDI to become better, induce them to set up centers in the country, which will allow Indian workers to learn, be invested in this innovation, in that R&D, and learn from that. And then just the center being in India allows colleges, universities, researchers in India to access that network, to harness, those that knowledge, and then kind of technology transfer, and then innovate. You can start your own companies in the country. So that's one way. The study you mentioned by Mashilkar, Shah and Thomas gives a way of the government being the buyer of first resort. So the government contracts out specific things that they want in defense manufacturing, in say the internet, kind of things like that, or leading edge technologies that the government needs are important for strategic reasons, or important to might be in the future, to Indian companies, which incentivizes to invest, gives them kind of safe space to invest in these technologies, and then become better. Yeah. So these are some a few ways. There's a lot of work on innovation policy, but the bottom point is, if innovation and R&D is the aim, PLIs might not be the best way
Right.
to do it. Yeah.
Right. And since you mentioned FDI and you also written about it, the one fact that was surprising was, like, while the automotive sector has succeeded in getting FDI, non-PLI sectors, especially services, have performed better in attracting foreign
Yeah.
investment. So it shows that PLIs have
Yeah.
not really helped in getting FDI into the country, and have not really made the domestic market that lucrative for FDI to
Right.
come
Yeah.
into the country. So there are other factors, maybe ease of business, market size, and all of that. That's very important.
Right.
And since you also talked about the paper by Marshall Kar, I would suggest to our listeners to really read that paper, because that talks about how, for example, they've given the example of NASA and all, where which outsources 80% of its work compared to maybe 20% at ISRO and other Indian domestic companies. So yeah, that's one wonderful report. And since we were talking about overcapacity and all, just today I read a news article where which says that around 50% of the capacity in the smartphone or electronics manufacturing units in India is lying unutilized. Uh, and there's a little bit of differentiation in that, wherein export-oriented units are still seeing a lot of utilization of their capacity, but those focused entirely on domestic markets have seen like almost 50% of their capacity lying
Right.
unutilized. So yeah, that's something that we need to
Right.
consider. There's this one study that you mentioned in your op-ed, which suggested that incentives should be based on efficient costs or prices to drive value addition. So if you could maybe just
Yeah.
touch upon that.
So this again comes back to value addition, domestic value addition, local value addition, and R&D in the country. So efficient costs means how over time how much better you get at improving your productivity of capital or productivity of cost. So how much you can produce more efficiently in lesser amount of money. So that's what efficient cost. So basing incentives on that can give you incentivize companies to make their products, processes more efficient, products more efficient in better technologies, and basically inducing them to do R&D, right? So this will help integrate those companies into the GVC. So it's just that again it ties on to the same point that our PLIs will not be enough. So say an ILI, probably an innovation linked incentive or something like that.
Research and development linked incentive.
Right, R&D linked incentive, something like that. So this is basically that. But a problem in that might be that, like I said, this technicalities in which some of these subsidies can be illegal under WTO rules. So you have to be very wary of that. A lot of these, I think Korea and all did this in the early, in the 20th century, mid 20th century. But now I think it's not as legal as probably that. But the PLIs have some LVA requirements. So, for example, but they can't, they don't give incentives based on LVA. But to apply, for companies to apply to PLIs, you need to have some kind of LVA requirement. So 25% LVA requirement, something like that. So it's not explicitly based on value addition, but kind of implicitly you want to solve that. But other subsidies like the FAME subsidy for electric vehicles, that was somewhat based on, value addition in the country. So if companies like say Tata Motors did not add as much value as they did in the country, they wouldn't have got the FAME. So foreign, so like BYD and all, they don't get the FAME subsidy because they are manufactured outside of India. They're imported. So that is basically efficient costs and LVA based incentive. That's
Okay. So yeah, you've talked about a lot of things that can be done better, right? So I mean, any other thoughts on what should be the road ahead? Like what should be done firstly to PLI schemes intrinsically, like to make them efficient on their own, and like what other nuanced interventions, like sector specific interventions, other than what you've already maybe talked about. What could be the road ahead?
Yeah. So one, there needs to be like a pipeline of industrial policy intervention, not after the PLI. So the PLIs might be enough to incentivize companies to set up shop in the country, but after that, to increase their manufacturing, to bring downstream effects, upstream effect, there need to be different kind of policy intervention. So one of them might be to solve India's trade policy. So so we worked on a paper on India's India and the ITA agreement. So it's an information technology agreement signed under WTO. So the ITA is an agreement in which signatories, and India is one, agree to bring their IT, information technology, electronic goods tariffs down to zero, import and export. So just to enable trade in IT goods in the world. India's tariffs have been really high over the years, and when we know anti-dumping or this kind of to stop dumping by cheap Chinese goods or other kind of cheaper or better cheaper goods manufactured in Vietnam or Malaysia. I think this kind of policy was introduced, but countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan saw a boom in their electronics manufacturing with industrial policies focused on that, and also adhering to these trade policy standards, right? By reducing tariffs to zero, they enabled entry of intermediate products. They enabled, competitor products to come into the country. They could compete with those domestically and then scale up their manufacturing, better their manufacturing. So trade policy is very important to kind of, solve the whole manufacturing problem in general, over time. Credit access is another problem. So especially for MSMEs, it hampers their ability to expand, to innovate, to if you don't get enough working capital very easily, it can harm your growth. It stifles your overall growth, and it makes them more vulnerable to downturns. It makes them more vulnerable to slowdowns in the economy. And if there's a lot of NPAs in MSME sectors, then that's a kind of red flag that credit risk is not bad. So labor laws, again, it's been discussed very very frequently. So these kind of interventions need to come with the PLI. At some point in time, there needs to be an innovation-linked incentive, and all of these sectors have, or groups of these sectors have different problems, and there need to be focused interventions on these sectors, what their problems are, and what you can solve. So that can be anything. So that can be for MSMEs, like I said, business development support. For electronics manufacturing, that innovation, subsidies, tax credits. For say food processing, it can be infrastructure development. It can be transportation. It can be some better form of SEZs, for example. So this is a very different kind of intervention that the PLI can't solve. The PLI might be a good first step. So there is a big might in there, but good first step. But then what? So then what is the? So then these interventions are needed.
Yeah, and all the other policies that you mentioned, those are also important, trade policies and all.
Yeah.
And since you mentioned about ITA, right, so the idea was to reduce the tariffs to zero. But surprisingly, now India has an inverted tariff structure, sort of. So we have very low tariffs on the finished product, like mobile phones and smartphones, but very high import tariffs on the components.
Intermediate, yeah.
Right, and but even that has not really spurred the component manufacturing industry in India, and we have not seen innovation in that that industry also. So, as you mentioned, there have to be some other nuanced sector-specific interventions that need to be made, and I guess it's also a matter of our industries reorienting themselves to be more export oriented, right? Otherwise, within a domestic market, the need for innovation sometimes gets stifled or may not be as easily noticeable or visible, right? So I think that's it's been a great
covered,
we've covered a lot here, and it's been quite comprehensive. If you have any parting thoughts, that one line that you've written in your op-ed that sort of sums up everything. India needs to move beyond the current PLI framework towards more nuanced sector-specific interventions. Yeah,
I think that very much sums up what I said also. So good first step. Then
next?
what? So that's the big question, and Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Miheer. That was a wonderful discussion, and I hope our listeners have also enjoyed it. And to our listeners, please let us know your feedback on this. And thanks for listening in.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.